You need to move. Ma'am, that seat's reserved for Lord Harrington. The words struck like turbulence before takeoff. Victoria Grant froze mid-step, boarding pass in hand, her eyes locking onto the flight attendant, whose tone was less policy and more prejudice. Around her, the hush of first class sharpened. Passengers turned. Whispers fluttered like seatbelt signs switching on. Victoria, CEO of a tech firm valued at $7 billion, stood still, calm as steel, the seat in question. 2A bore her name. Confirmed, paid, platinum. But to this airline, and to the woman in the pale blue uniform, none of that seemed to matter. A white man in a cashmere coat waited expectantly just behind the flight attendant, as if royalty had arrived and the peasant in navy jeans was in his way. "This is my seat," Victoria said evenly, raising her pass. The attendant's reply sliced through the silence. "Not anymore." And just like that, the air shifted not from altitude, but audacity. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Victoria Grant didn't move. The boarding pass in her hand still glowed faintly from the gate's scanner, her platinum status clearly printed beside seat 2A. Yet, the words, "not anymore," echoed louder than any jet engine. She was no stranger to resistance, but rarely did it come this raw, this direct, this public. She had spoken no insult. She had raised no voice. All she had done was exist in first class, in a navy blazer and gray tee, with skin too dark and posture too confident for some to digest. Behind her, passengers began murmuring. One woman leaned into her husband, whispering behind her hand. A man 2 rows back lowered his newspaper slowly. The air thickened with judgment, masked as curiosity. Emma, the flight attendant, stood stiffly like a guard dog misjudging a guest for a threat. "I need you to step aside," she repeated, this time louder, adding a rehearsed formality. "It's for operational reassignment." Victoria blinked once. "Operational," she echoed softly. Noah, the senior attendant, stepped forward, holding a tablet. There was a glitch in payment. System didn't confirm it. Her seat was released automatically. His voice was low, but the damage was loud. Victoria didn't argue. Not yet. She looked around, and that's when the real humiliation began, not from the crew, but the silence. No one stood up. No one intervened. Not even the man in 2B until then. Just a well-dressed black professional browsing his phone raised his eyes. She caught a flicker of recognition in his glance, but he said nothing. Yet, a part of her wanted to shout, to point out the absurdity of a multi-million-dollar CEO being told her money wasn't real, her status wasn't valid, her seat wasn't hers. But she didn't, because she had been here before. At 27 on a red-eye to London, her business class upgrade had mysteriously vanished when a hedge fund VP walked up. The flight crew had smiled politely and told her, "We hope you'll understand." She hadn't argued then either. She had smiled, taken her economy seat, and cried silently against the window while the man who took her upgrade snored across the aisle with a glass of champagne. Now, years later, in a tailored blazer and $850 loafers, it was happening again with different uniforms, but the same energy. "Ma'am," Emma said, now sterner, "please don't make this difficult." The words were condescendingly sweet, laced with blame for a conflict she didn't create. Victoria still said nothing, but her silence wasn't consent. It was calculation. Her assistant, Riley, stood a few feet behind, quiet, but alert. She clutched Victoria's leather tote and tilted her phone discreetly. Recording had already begun. Just audio for now. But that would be enough. "I'm not making anything," Victoria said finally, her voice steady as iron. "I'm standing in front of my seat, with my ticket, confirmed at the gate." Noah checked the manifest again. It's showing unconfirmed, possibly a late cancellation. Victoria didn't even blink. Check again. And yet, they didn't. Instead, they looked past her to Lord Julian Harrington, now gliding down the aisle in his pale coat like nobility descending the stairs of an opera house. Behind him trailed Lucas Bennett, CEO of Bennett AI. The man Victoria was hours away from closing a $500 million tech equity deal with. Lucas took one look at Victoria and then leaned toward Emma. You can't expect him to sit in an aisle seat, beside just anyone. This was supposed to be arranged. That was the first jab. Public. Cold. But the second came sharper. Julian Harrington sighed theatrically. "This is about social hierarchy," he said aloud. "She'll understand." Emma nodded slightly, as if the issue had been settled. "Please, Ms. Grant," she said again. "We'll reseat you. Comfort won't be compromised." Victoria tilted her head. "This seat is not about comfort. It's about confirmation. And you just confirmed exactly why some of us are never welcome in first class, even when we've paid." A sharp breath left the lips of the man in 2B. He folded his hands, finally setting his phone down. "She belongs exactly where she's standing," he said quietly. The moment froze. Emma's eyes twitched. Lucas frowned. Julian scoffed. And then, cutting through the pressure like a scalpel, Victoria reached into her tote. Not for her ID, not for proof, but for a memory. 25 years old. First international client pitch. A woman at the gate telling her you must be in the wrong line. A mistake that placed her in coach. An apology never given. A dignity never returned. She exhaled slowly, pressing that memory back into place like armor. "I'm not asking," she said to Emma. "I'm stating, this is my seat. But still no apology. No acknowledgement. Only silence. And in that silence, a humiliation older than this flight, heavier than any luggage. But this time, she would not take off quietly." Victoria Grant didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She didn't flash credentials or demand to speak to a supervisor. Instead, she stood in the stillness like a monument carved from calm and resolve. "Ma'am," Emma repeated, her voice sharper now. "We need you to vacate this area or we'll be forced to escalate." That was the word escalate. A favorite in corporate training manuals. A shield for bad judgment. A veiled threat disguised as protocol. Victoria turned, not to Emma or Noah, but to her assistant, Riley Parker. "Riley," she said smoothly, "pull up our equity audit framework, the version we're presenting to the Bennett board." Riley didn't miss a beat. She pulled her phone, tapped 3 times, and opened a file labeled GVT Bennett AI Deal Final. PDF. It wasn't just any file. It was a $500 million framework designed to restructure AI hiring algorithms to reduce bias across multinational platforms. Victoria had built it with her own hands, vetted it with a dozen experts, and presented it to a dozen firms. It was the reason she was on this flight. And it was the reason Lucas Bennett's face blanched as soon as Riley said clearly, "Document ready. Page 17 has the internal pilot program breakdown." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the file name. Victoria turned back to Noah. "You said I was unconfirmed?" she stated. Noah hesitated. That's what the manifest shows. Then let's correct the manifest, she said evenly. Because right now, what you're not seeing isn't my seat status. It's your liability. Across the aisle, Julian Hayes, a journalist with a sharp eye for institutional bias, narrowed his gaze and slowly lifted his phone again. His camera caught Emma's expression, which flickered between stubborn and scared. Julian had covered equity failures before: silent reassignments, quiet removals, polite discrimination. But this was something different. This was happening in real time, and the person being erased had teeth and power. Lucas took a small step forward. "Victoria," he began, his tone now oily, measured. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." She turned to face him, expression unmoved. "Bigger," she echoed. "Lucas, you brought your legacy first. Optics over merit, partner, onto a flight that my company arranged, on an itinerary built around a deal I engineered. You watched me get blocked from my seat and said nothing. And now you're worried about size." He opened his mouth, then shut it. "Let me be clear." Victoria continued. "The only reason I'm here today is because Grant Vision Tech, my company, extended an offer to yours. You needed us, not the other way around." Julian Harrington chuckled from behind her. "Oh, please," he drawled. "Everyone's got a deck these days. You're not the only founder with a PDF and a sob story. That was the second time someone underestimated her based on a page count." Victoria ignored him. Instead, she nodded at Riley again. "Read my bio summary." Riley cleared her throat, but her voice rang clear. Victoria Grant, founder and CEO of Grant Vision Tech, former DARPA Innovation Lead, keynote speaker at the World Tech Equity Forum, advisor to the White House Council on Algorithmic Ethics, graduate of MIT and Wharton, holds 6 patents in machine learning design and dynamic decision tree logic. Company valuation as of Q1, $7.1 billion. Silence fell. Noah blinked. Emma looked stunned. Lucas looked ruined. "You said I didn't meet your platinum dress standard," Victoria said, her eyes never leaving Emma's. "Tell me, what does someone need to wear to validate a $7 billion valuation? Pearls and passivity?" Noah cleared his throat and looked at his tablet again. Seat 2A still shows as open. Then your system is broken," Victoria replied. "And I don't say that lightly. I built systems. That glitch at check-in. Your kiosk crashed at 9:55 a.m. I swiped my card twice. The second swipe printed a receipt. Your gate agent scanned it. The timestamp is on the boarding pass you scanned. Want to see it?" She handed over the paper. Noah took it, suddenly sweating. Emma leaned in behind him, her tone defensive now. "We're just following policy." "No," Victoria said calmly. "You're following assumptions. That's the difference." Julian Hayes zoomed his camera tighter on her face. "And that," he whispered to himself, "is the story." Across the cabin, murmurs began again, but this time, they weren't curious. They were aligned. Someone whispered, "That's her." Another nodded. That's Victoria Grant. Passengers weren't just watching. They were recalibrating. William Reed, the entrepreneur beside seat 2B, leaned forward again. "I've built a business too," he said, speaking for the first time since his earlier comment. "I know what it's like to be disrespected before you're recognized. You don't have to prove anything to them." "I'm not proving," Victoria replied softly. "I'm documenting." Then, louder, "because this moment will not be buried like the others." Julian Hayes nodded once. "Already rolling," he said. And then came the pivot, the shift. Emma stepped back, her jaw tight, her voice tight. I'll check with the captain. Noah followed her, head down. But Victoria stood tall, alone, yet not isolated. Because in that cabin, her power was no longer hidden. It had just become undeniable. Ban kom one min viet tiep. Part 4 Systemic rot, oitsunt fancy to kong. Ban ja nui, yes. ChatGPT jait noi, duoi jai. La. Part 4 Systemic rot. Ju eitsul fancies tu. Ka kautrao vatin huong bat. Now go. Part 4 Systemic rot. The footsteps of Emma and Noah faded down the narrow aisle toward the cockpit, but their absence didn't soften the tension. If anything, the silence amplified it. Victoria Grant remained standing beside seat 2A, flanked by Riley and William Reed, both now alert and unyielding. Around them, a cabin full of well-dressed strangers bore witness not just to a seating dispute, but to something deeper unraveling at 36,000 feet before takeoff. Julian Hayes lowered his phone momentarily and glanced toward Victoria. "They'll spin this," he said. "They always do. A misunderstanding, a miscommunication. Nothing intentional." Victoria responded without turning. Then we record it right, word for word, breath for breath, no denials left on landing. A notification buzzed on Riley's phone. She opened it, blinked, and then whispered, "Victoria." The DEI Incident Archive. 3 separate passengers on this airline filed complaints about similar treatment. Last 6 months. None received response. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "Same airline." "Same crew code," Riley added. "Emma's badge ID is listed on 2. William leaned in. "So this isn't a fluke. It's a pattern." Victoria nodded once. "Then let's trace the rot to its roots." Just then, Emma returned alone. Her face was taut, professional, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "The captain has been informed," she said coldly. "He requests that you comply so we can avoid unnecessary delay." Victoria gave a thin smile. "And did you inform him that I'm a confirmed platinum passenger with a scanned boarding pass and video documentation of your reassignment attempt?" Emma's jaw flexed. "This isn't personal. It never is," Victoria said, "until someone records it." Across the aisle, Julian Hayes hit the record button again. Emma's tone sharpened. "We've followed every standard protocol." "No," Victoria countered, her voice steady but cutting. "You followed habit, which isn't the same as policy. And habit, when unchecked, becomes culture." Lucas Bennett, still standing nearby, scoffed. "Not everything is a conspiracy. Sometimes systems just fail. That's convenient," Victoria said, "especially for those the system was built to serve." Emma stepped forward. "You're accusing us of discrimination." "I'm observing a pattern," Victoria replied. "And I'm not the only one." William Reed raised his voice. "Last month, same airline. I was downgraded from first to economy at the gate. No explanation. Just a shrug and a, 'Sorry, sir.' I let it go. Most of us do. But not her. Not today." A woman in 3D leaned forward. "It happened to me, too. Last fall. Business seat reassigned after I boarded. I was told I'd been moved for balance. I didn't even know that was possible mid-boarding." Julian Hayes turned his camera toward her. "What's your name?" "Ma'am Danielle Wu," she replied quietly. "VP of Equity Compliance at another airline." Irony. Right? Victoria nodded slightly, the weight of their stories solidifying the broader truth. This wasn't about her alone. It was a reflection of something deeply embedded, deeply defended, and dangerously normalized. Emma's face had lost color. "We don't control those kinds of decisions," she said. "We follow instructions." "Exactly," Victoria said. "The kind passed down without a trace. Protocols no one writes down, but everyone enforces." At that moment, Noah reappeared, tablet still in hand. But something had shifted in his demeanor. He looked tired, more human now than corporate. "Ms. Grant?" he began, his voice lower. "I rechecked the system. It looks like your seat was flagged during a payment confirmation delay." "Not rejected," Victoria clarified. He shook his head slowly. "No." The kiosk glitched, but the second swipe went through. "The agent scanned you in. I can see the timestamp. So the issue isn't payment," she said. Noah nodded reluctantly. It was a flag. And, well, the system allows manual reassignment when flags appear. "Who makes that call?" Victoria asked, already knowing. Emma's shoulders stiffened. Noah didn't answer. Victoria turned toward the front of the cabin. "Then let's talk about how your system handles doubt, how it weaponizes it, how one small flag opens the door for a full displacement, and somehow those displacements always seem to target the same kind of people." Emma inhaled sharply. "We don't profile. You don't need to," Victoria replied, "because your process already does it for you." Lucas Bennett finally snapped. "You're twisting this into a grand social indictment. It's just a seat." "No," Victoria said, voice rising for the first time, not in volume, but in force. "It's never just a seat. It's the tip of the spear, the moment where bias goes from subtle to sanctioned. And the silence of every bystander is what makes it feel normal." More murmurs spread. Passengers shifting in their seats not out of boredom, but realization. Julian Hayes kept his camera steady. "They're going to remember this moment," he whispered. Victoria nodded. "Good. Because what happens next will be a referendum not on my worth, but on this airline's soul." The rot was no longer theoretical. It had names, it had patterns, and it was now on record. A quiet settled over the first-class cabin, thick with realization. It was no longer just about Victoria Grant's boarding pass. This was something more, a mirror being held up in front of every passenger, every uniform, every silence. And then, something shifted. A voice, measured but unmistakably clear, cut through the tension. "She's right." Every head turned. William Reed, still seated in 2B, set down his phone and slowly stood. His frame was tall, his presence calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made the crew pause. "I've stayed quiet too many times," he continued, facing the row of attendants, "because I didn't want to be labeled difficult, because I didn't want to be the story. But watching what you just did, that was the story. That was the pattern." Emma's mouth opened, defensive instinct rising, but William raised a hand not aggressively, but with authority. "I've built 3 companies from the ground up," he said. "Been a platinum flyer for over a decade. I've been reassigned, delayed, ignored more times than I can count. You all called it a system error, a mix-up, but somehow the mix-ups keep picking the same kind of people." Another voice joined in, soft but firm. "Last month, I was on SL226, said a woman in 3F. They told me I had been downgraded due to weight distribution. Funny how I was the only woman of color in business class that day." Emma's head turned toward her. "Ma'am, I assure you, no, the woman replied. Don't assure me. Listen to me. Across the cabin, a balding white man in 1D quiet until now closed his tablet with a sigh. I've flown Skylux for 15 years, he said, and I've watched things happen. Too many times. People getting politely moved, accidentally flagged, temporarily reseated. But it's always people who don't look like me. That can't be a coincidence. Lucas Bennett shifted uncomfortably. Let's not turn this into a trial by cabin, he muttered. It's a misunderstanding. Julian Hayes lifted his phone. Misunderstandings don't come with patterns. And then came the moment no one expected. The curtain between first class and the galley parted, and an older flight attendant, mid-60s, gray-streaked hair, navy uniform from a prior era stepped forward. Her name tag read, Angela. I've been flying with Skylux for 29 years, she said. I've seen every protocol, every quiet memo, every unspoken rule. Emma turned to her, confused. Angela held up a hand. Emma, don't. You're not the first to enforce this. You just happen to be the one who got caught. Emma's eyes flared. I was doing my job. No, Angela said gently. You were doing what the job became, and that's the problem. A stunned silence followed. Angela turned toward Victoria. I saw you walk on board. I knew who you were. I read about you in the Aviation Equity Journal. I should have stepped in. I should have said something. But after decades of watching the system do this to people, her voice caught. I got tired of fighting. I'm sorry. Victoria blinked. For the first time that flight, her eyes softened. Thank you, she said quietly. It's not too late. Angela nodded slowly. I'll give my statement. I'll back the recording. Emma looked around, watching the tide shift faster than she could anchor herself. You're all making this worse, she said, her voice cracking. We followed the manifest. But you didn't question the manifest, William replied. And that's the issue. You treated it like gospel when it worked in your favor. But when it glitched against someone like her, you didn't question it. You weaponized it. Angela stepped closer. This is a reckoning, Emma. And reckonings don't ask for permission. From the back of the cabin, a voice chimed in from a young man in economy who had overheard everything through the curtain. Yo, is this going viral yet? Julian Hayes grinned. Give it 5 more minutes. Emma's shoulders slumped. Riley, still recording, leaned toward Victoria. It's happening, she whispered. They're waking up. Victoria didn't smile. Not yet. There was still more to expose, more layers to peel back. But in that moment, with passengers speaking, veterans confessing, and power beginning to shift, she felt it. The silence was cracking, not with noise, but with truth. Victoria didn't sit down. Not yet. She stood tall beside seat 2A like it was a podium. Her posture was a declaration, I'm not moving, but everything else is about to. Riley stepped beside her with the quiet precision of someone trained to anticipate momentum. I've pulled all incident data for Skylux Flight SL3 Maintain, she whispered. Time-stamped voice memos, boarding logs, and system alerts. But there's more. I just got a push notification from our internal equity database. There's a flagged file labeled Reassignment Priority Override. Victoria raised an eyebrow. That's not a passenger file. Is it? No. Riley replied. It's crew-side, hidden in their internal training portal. Not public. Not policy. Just embedded suggestion. Victoria turned toward Noah, who now stood stiffly near the galley door, tablet clutched like a shield. Noah, she said calmly, do you know about reassignment priority override? His eyes darted toward Emma, then to Lucas, then back down. I've heard the term, he admitted. But not in training, she asked. He swallowed. It's not official. Just something that gets mentioned. By who? No answer. Victoria nodded toward Riley. Can you read it aloud? Riley tapped the screen. Her voice was even, but loaded. In the event of late arrival priority passengers, reassignment protocols may be implemented at crew discretion. Consider optics, brand representation, and loyalty hierarchy. In ambiguous cases, default to legacy clients. Do not document unless escalation occurs. A ripple went through the cabin like turbulence. Julian Hayes lifted his phone higher. Got it. Video and audio. Angela, the senior flight attendant who had broken ranks earlier, stepped closer. I've seen that phrase, she said. It's not part of our handbook. It's part of the backroom briefings we get before select flights, usually when VIP clients or high-profile investors are flying. Emma's face flushed. Angela, stop. No, Angela said, louder now. You stop. We're not going to lie our way out of this. Victoria's eyes stayed locked on Noah. You were told to deprioritize passengers who didn't look the part. Weren't you? I was told. He hesitated. To use discretion. And what does discretion mean when it comes to black women in first class? Noah didn't answer, but the silence was deafening. Riley stepped forward. Victoria, I've pulled security footage from the boarding gate too. You scanned in at 10:04 a.m., immediately after kiosk error at 9:55. Both timestamps match the flight schedule. Perfect, Victoria said. Save it. Tag it for legal archive and sync it to our compliance backup, Emma snapped. You're overstepping. No, Victoria said coldly. I'm recording what should have been questioned hours ago. Lucas Bennett, still standing with forced composure, chuckled bitterly. This won't hold up. You're not even part of the crew. I'm not part of the silence either, Victoria replied. And then came the twist. From the back of the cabin, the curtain pulled aside again. A woman in civilian clothes, mid-40s, glasses, tablet in hand, stepped forward with badge clipped to her blouse. Her presence was unexpected, her tone measured. Excuse me, she said. I'm Denise Foster, Corporate Compliance Officer. I was flying unannounced for internal audit. Emma blinked. You're on this flight? Denise nodded. Row 5E. Been watching everything. The crew paled. Victoria turned slightly. Ms. Foster, did you observe the reassignment attempt I did? She replied. And I also noted the exact moment policy was abandoned for preference. Denise held up her tablet. I've logged 7 violations so far. I'll be submitting an initial incident report to Skylux Legal upon landing. Emma's voice cracked. You don't have the full context. No, Denise interrupted. You're right. I don't. That's why I'll need the full manifest, crew briefing notes, kiosk logs, and the name of the gate agent who scanned Ms. Grant in. Now, Lucas muttered. This is overkill. No, Victoria said sharply. This is accountability. Angela turned to Emma. We told ourselves this culture was normal. We said it was about branding, but it was bias packaged, polished, and passed off as policy. Emma took a shaky breath. We were trying to preserve comfort. Whose comfort? Victoria asked. Noah couldn't hold it anymore. He looked up at Victoria with a face drained of denial. I'm sorry, he said quietly. You're right. I didn't question the glitch. I assumed. You didn't belong. And that, Victoria said, stepping forward, is the most dangerous assumption of all, because it doesn't need proof, just precedent. Denise stepped between them now, professional and composed. We'll investigate, she said, officially. But what I've witnessed here, this isn't isolated. It's systemic. Victoria nodded. Then let's expose every inch of it. And with that, Riley hit one last button on her phone. Upload complete. Filed Equity Audit Archive. Synced National Aviation Oversight Committee. Status Public Disclosure pending. The evidence was no longer silent. It was loud. It was documented. And it was about to bring the system to its knees. Victoria didn't flinch as Denise Foster, the corporate compliance officer, stepped away to begin compiling her report. The cabin was now a gallery of tension faces, stunned, defensive, or awakening in real time. But Victoria didn't revel in it. She calculated. Quietly. Precisely. She turned to Riley. Time to initiate Phase 2, she said. Riley understood instantly. She tapped her phone, opened an app labeled GVT Internal, Crisis Comms, and sent a single push, Activate Media Buffer. Subject Flight SL319 Incident. Stakeholders 14. Confirm CEO level contact. Within seconds, messages began pinging. PR leads, legal counsel, digital evidence teams, and 3 equity auditors from Grant Vision Tech, already briefed on worst-case escalation protocols, were coming online. William Reed leaned in from 2B. You came ready for this? Victoria nodded once. I've seen too many boardrooms where receipts meant nothing unless they were televised. So now I bring the cameras before they ask for proof. Lucas Bennett snorted a breath. You planned this. No, she said. I prepared for this. Big difference. He smirked. You're going to weaponize a seating glitch into a civil war. Victoria turned to face him directly. Lucas, you and I were hours from closing a $500 million deal built on the foundation of equity technology. And when that technology walked onto this plane in human form, wearing a navy blazer and loafers instead of pearls and heels, your reaction wasn't alignment. It was avoidance. You didn't just watch me be erased. You endorsed it. Riley raised her phone. Press lead from Forbes is online, she whispered. They've requested official comment. Victoria didn't blink. Hold them. We wait until the airline makes one more mistake. Then we let the story breathe. Angela, the senior attendant, stepped closer. You're not just going to file a complaint, are you? Victoria turned to her. Complaints don't fix systems, but blueprints do. Angela's brows furrowed. Victoria continued. 6 months ago, we drafted a response protocol for scenarios like this. Not reactive structural. It's been shelved while we waited for the right moment to pilot it. Guess what? This flight just volunteered. Riley opened another folder and titled it Sky Equity Protocol Emergency Onboarding Draft. Denise Foster returned, overhearing the phrase, Did you say Sky Equity Protocol? She asked. Yes, Victoria replied. We designed it in partnership with 3 major carriers. Implicit bias de-escalation, dynamic reassignment audit tracking, equity first training sequences for all cabin crew. Skylux declined to test it last quarter. Denise's eyes widened slightly. I remember. Legal said it was too disruptive to existing hierarchy. Victoria's smile was thin. Exactly. Emma, who had been standing off to the side, trying to salvage composure, stepped forward. You're trying to rewrite the system in real time. That's not fair. No, Victoria said. What's not fair is that the system you enforce only recognizes value when it wears a silk scarf and speaks with inherited confidence. Emma's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lucas tried again. You're going to lose leverage with this drama. Our board doesn't like theatrics. That's the problem, Victoria said calmly. Your board has confused accountability with theatrics, so allow me to give them a preview of what happens when the people they ignored start taking notes. At that moment, Riley's phone vibrated again. She leaned in. Elaine is online. Do you want to loop her in? Victoria nodded. Elaine GVT's general counsel and one of the most respected legal minds in corporate equity law appeared on a live audio stream. Her voice, calm and exacting, cut through the noise. I've reviewed the footage, Elaine said. This qualifies as a discriminatory reassignment under Section 304 of FAA's updated Civil Passenger Equity Code. Skylux is in violation. Emma's face drained of color. Elaine continued. Ms. Grant, would you like me to issue a formal complaint to the Department of Transportation now, or wait until Skylux attempts to suppress the footage? Victoria looked at Riley. How many passengers do we have recording for confirmed? Riley said, including Hayes. His feed just crossed 50,000 live viewers. Victoria turned back to Elaine. We wait. Let them move again. Elaine's tone didn't shift. Understood. Standing by. Julian Hayes, hearing this, shook his head in awe. You're not fighting the system. You built the counter-system. I had to, Victoria said, because I've sat in too many rooms where injustice was an agenda item then tabled indefinitely. Emma stood frozen, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you were just another demanding passenger. No, Victoria said, stepping forward now. I'm the warning you ignored, the protocol you dismissed, the one you assumed would yield quietly. Lucas looked to Julian Harrington, who had remained silent through most of the shift in power. Are you just going to let this happen? But Harrington surprised them both. He turned to Victoria. You just turned a moment into a movement, he said grudgingly. And I think your stock just went up. Victoria didn't smile. She didn't need to, because her moves weren't loud. They were surgical, and the scalpel had just touched bone. Ms. Grant. This is your final warning, Emma announced, her voice now rising not from confidence, but desperation. If you refuse to relocate, I'll be forced to involve security and initiate a removal protocol. The cabin held its breath. Victoria turned slowly, facing Emma directly for the first time since the confrontation began. The moment was sharp quiet, but edged like glass. Go ahead, Victoria said. Call them? Emma hesitated. I said, call them, Victoria repeated, more deliberate. But before you do, repeat loudly why I'm being removed. Emma's lips parted, but no words came. Julian Hayes tilted his phone to capture the exchange. William Reed leaned in closer. Riley's audio recorder was already rolling. Emma looked to Noah for backup, but he was frozen in place. Guilt slathered across his expression like sweat. Even Lucas took a half step back, unwilling to be the face of enforcement now that the balance of power had shifted. Say it, Victoria said. Say I'm being removed because I refused to surrender a confirmed seat to a man who arrived after me. Say it's because of a glitch you didn't verify, and a policy you can't name. Say it on camera, for the record. Emma's jaw tightened. I was following instructions. Then produce them, Victoria replied. Show me the written directive that says a black woman in first class wearing jeans is subject to discretionary downgrade. You're escalating the situation. Emma shot back. "No," Victoria said, stepping closer. "I'm ending it." The cabin felt like a courtroom now, and Emma was standing on trial. "Let's walk through this together," Victoria said, her voice cool and composed. "Your gate agent scanned my boarding pass. Confirmed 2A. Riley. Timestamp 10:04 A.M. Riley responded. I boarded quietly, took my place in line. I presented no threat, caused no disturbance, and wore clothing within the airline's published dress code for platinum clients. Fact. Angela stepped forward. Voice firm. Fact. I reviewed the internal dress standards this morning. Jeans are allowed. Victoria continued. Then you, she gestured to Emma, chose to override the system flag without investigating it. You reassigned me based on that flag and replaced me with a white aristocrat whose name wasn't even on the manifest until 9 minutes ago. Julian Harrington, now seated comfortably nearby, smiled smugly. It's Lord Harrington. Victoria didn't break eye contact. Your title isn't relevant. Your entitlement is. The gasp from row 3 was audible. Emma fumbled for words, but Victoria wasn't finished. You tried to cover the reassignment with a false claim about unpaid status, she said. Then, when that failed, you shifted to dress code. When that failed, you shifted to protocol. When that failed, you tried intimidation. Emma's face flushed crimson. You've run out of shifts, Victoria concluded. Angela stepped in, her voice unwavering. I'll make a statement to corporate HR. I've witnessed every word. Riley tapped her phone. Statement logged. Audio backed up to our secured drive. Cloud copy en route to GVT Legal. Emma took one small step back. That's when the cabin door opened and 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped inside. The breath caught in everyone's throat. Emma straightened her shoulders. She's the one, she said quickly. Ms. Grant is refusing crew instructions. She's non-compliant. The officers glanced toward Victoria, calm, standing in front of seat 2A like it had always belonged to her. Before they could speak, William Reed stepped between them. Before you move 1 inch toward her, you should know we have 6 active video feeds recording, including 1 streaming live to over 60,000 viewers. You're being observed by corporate counsel, 3 members of the press, and an internal compliance officer who just initiated a legal audit. He gestured toward Denise Foster, who held up her Skylux credentials. The officers hesitated. Emma looked rattled. She's obstructing crew operations. Not true, Denise cut in. Ms. Grant has complied with all documented policies. The obstruction is yours. And this is not removal protocol. This is retaliation. Julian Hayes moved closer. You're seconds away from being in tomorrow's headlines. Victoria took a step forward. Not aggressive measured. Gentlemen, she said to the officers, would you like to review my boarding documents before taking action? They nodded. She handed them her ID and pass. One officer scanned it. His expression shifted instantly. Confirmed, he muttered to the other. Boarded at 10:04. System shows reassigned manually. Emma's voice cracked. But she's exactly where she's supposed to be, the officer said, cutting her off. Emma stared in disbelief. You can't be serious. The second officer looked her dead in the eyes. Ma'am, we're not here to enforce discrimination. We're here to maintain order, and you've disrupted that. Gasps and murmurs filled the cabin again. A few scattered claps began from the rear. Emma stepped back. Lucas closed his eyes and muttered something inaudible. Victoria nodded once. Thank you. Officers. That'll be all. They left without incident. Emma didn't. She just stood there, trembling, not from fear, but from the slow, dawning truth. She wasn't in charge anymore. Victoria turned, stepped to her seat, and placed her tote on the cushion, not to sit, but to mark it. She faced the cabin. I've reclaimed my space, she said calmly. Now let's reclaim the standard. The ripple that began with a denied seat had now surged into a full-scale reckoning. The moment the officers stepped back, confirming that Victoria's seat assignment was valid and the reassignment was improper. The atmosphere in the cabin changed, not subtly dramatically. Emma stood rooted, eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an exit that didn't exist. Noah stared at the floor, clutching his tablet like a sinking lifeboat. Lucas Bennett shifted in his spot, phone in hand, now texting furiously likely damage control. But too late. The aircraft hadn't even taken off, and reputations were already grounded. Denise Foster, the Skylux compliance officer, took a step forward. I've contacted corporate legal, she said clearly for all to hear. They've escalated this to executive oversight. This flight and its crew are now under live review. Emma gasped. Live? What does that mean? It means, Denise said calmly, that your decisions are being watched in real time by 3 board members, the head of PR, and the airline's general counsel. They've requested full incident footage and testimony. Angela crossed her arms. Good. They need to see what we've become. Emma whipped around to her. You're turning on your own team? No. Angela replied firmly. I'm protecting passengers from a culture that's been tolerated too long. Victoria said nothing. She didn't need to. Every eye in the cabin was on her, not with pity, not even with curiosity anymore. It was recognition, and something else, alignment. I've just received confirmation from our legal team, Riley said, glancing at her phone. Our company will be submitting a formal statement to federal transportation authorities. The evidence gathered here qualifies under the Civil Passenger Equity Code. Emma's jaw clenched. That's not law. Yet. Victoria responded. But it's regulation. And today, it becomes precedent. The screen on Noah's tablet blinked. He paled. I just got a direct message, he said, barely audible, from Skylux Corporate. They're requesting I forward all communications and internal logs about this flight. Send them, Victoria said. Send everything. Lucas let out a tense chuckle. You realize what you're doing? You're dismantling a system that's held up for decades. No, Victoria corrected. I'm watching it collapse under its own weight. And then the unexpected happened. From row 4A, a woman stood, mid-40s, stylish blazer, elegant, poised. She raised her hand. My name is Maya Patterson, she said. I filed a complaint 6 months ago with Skylux. I was removed from business class because an actor boarded last minute and needed space. They downgraded me to economy. I emailed. I called. No one responded. Emma blinked. Denise's eyes widened. You filed on SL 904. Maya nodded. Yes. They said there was no record. Riley tapped her phone. Got it. That complaint was flagged. Suppressed. There's a code here. Minimize exposure risk. No action required. Angela spoke next, her voice low. We were told not to escalate anything that didn't involve physical danger. Julian Hayes raised his camera, so complaints were filtered. By visibility, Noah whispered. We called it protecting the brand. William Reed spoke louder now, for everyone to hear. You didn't protect the brand. You protected the bias. A burst of murmurs surged through the cabin. More passengers stood up, one, then two, then five, each with a memory, each with a moment, each with a story they thought they'd buried in the name of convenience, civility, or simply keeping the flight on time. "I was once told I didn't look like an executive," said a man from 3B. "I was asked to step aside for a senator's son," added a woman from 1C. Emma backed away, slowly, the voices pressing in like a tide. "I didn't make the rules," she mumbled. "I just followed what I was told." "But you enforced them," Victoria said, finally speaking again. "And that's the part that breaks the system, not just the policy, but the people who uphold it without question." Lucas's voice cracked. "This isn't a board meeting. This is chaos." "No," Victoria said. "This is clarity. For once, the truth isn't being whispered. It's being witnessed." Riley looked up. "Elaine says media outlets are reaching out. 4 have confirmed interest in syndicating the footage." Emma turned to Noah. "Tell them it was a mistake." Noah shook his head. "I won't lie for you." And just like that, the final pillar fell. Julian Hayes lowered his phone and addressed the cabin. "This is no longer a dispute. This is a historic moment, a first-class uprising, led not with shouting but with receipts, resolve, and reality." Victoria stepped to the aisle, her voice measured but ringing with force. "This isn't about me. This is about every person who ever got moved, muted, or mistaken for less than they were. It stops today." The plane still hadn't moved, but the system had, and it would never be the same. The aircraft still hadn't lifted from the tarmac, but something far heavier than steel had just been grounded, a system of invisible hierarchies that had long thrived behind the polished smiles and scripted announcements of air travel. Emma stood motionless near the galley, her shoulders stiff, eyes wide but unfocused. She had become the embodiment of something far larger than herself, a proxy for policies written in code and enforced through silence. The command cabin door opened slightly, and the captain stepped halfway into the aisle. He was a composed man in his late 50s, with silver temples and the kind of posture forged from decades in the air. His voice was calm, professional. "What's the status?" he asked Emma, before she could speak. Denise Foster stepped forward, holding out her Skylux credentials. "Captain, I'm compliance oversight. I've already notified corporate legal. You're currently operating under audit protocol." His brows arched, but he didn't protest. "Understood. Shall I delay departure?" "You already have," Victoria said evenly. "Now the question is, will you take off in the same direction this company has always flown, or begin changing course?" The captain looked at her directly. "Ms. Grant, I recognize your name. I read your op-ed on AI ethics last year. You compared data bias to cabin bias. I wasn't speaking metaphorically," she replied. He nodded once. Then, in a rare gesture for a man trained to maintain distance, he extended his hand. "I'd like to apologize for what happened here, and for what's been allowed to happen for too long." The cabin froze. Emma's eyes narrowed. "Captain, are you taking sides? No?" he said, looking at her. "I'm taking responsibility." It was the first flicker of institutional humility, and it broke something open. Angela stepped forward. "Captain, with your permission, I'd like to read a portion of our crew handbook aloud to the cabin. It's the section we're supposed to follow, not the parts we whisper about in break rooms." He nodded. "Please." Angela opened the small navy binder every crew member carried and turned to page 12. All passengers with verified boarding credentials, regardless of appearance, status, or attire, are entitled to their assigned accommodations unless superseded by emergency reassignment with written clearance from operations. She paused. There was no emergency. There was no written clearance. There was only bias, and I can't be part of enforcing that anymore. A light wave of applause broke out. Small, hesitant at first, but it grew. Then, something unexpected, Noah. The young attendant whose silence had contributed to the escalation took a deep breath and walked toward Victoria. "I was wrong," he said, looking her in the eye. "Not just about your seat. About everything. The way I looked at you. The assumptions I made. I thought I was being efficient. I was being dangerous." Victoria nodded. Acknowledging that is more than most ever do. Noah turned to Emma. "We need to stop pretending that discretion is neutral. It's a weapon when wielded without checks." Emma looked as if she might reply, but no words came. And then, as if prompted by the invisible hand of consequence, Riley's phone pinged again. She glanced at the screen, then looked up. "Victoria, Skylux just sent a revised press statement draft. It acknowledges the incident and names you directly. They're offering a formal apology. They also want to fast-track the Sky Equity Protocol you proposed 6 months ago." The cabin stirred. Lucas Bennett, still seated near the aisle, paled. "They're going public with this?" he asked, his voice dry. Victoria didn't look at him. "They already are." Denise approached Riley. "Please forward me that draft. I'll review it against FAA compliance language and prepare oversight commentary. It's time this airline remembered that image without integrity is just illusion." A moment of stillness passed through the aircraft, a kind of quiet you only hear after lightning strikes. Victoria turned to face the cabin one last time before sitting. "This seat," she said softly, placing a hand on the back of 2A, "isn't about class, or comfort, or branding. It's about truth. Who gets believed? Who gets removed? Who gets to stay?" She finally took her seat not as a concession to authority, but as a reclamation of dignity. Passengers throughout first class adjusted their posture in subtle ways, as if silently declaring, "We see now." Angela moved back to her crew station, but her eyes didn't leave Victoria. Noah resumed his post, slower now, more thoughtful. Emma simply faded. She stood by the wall near the galley, no longer issuing orders, no longer being listened to. The captain returned to the cockpit, and for the first time since the boarding began, the aircraft's engines surged to life. But something else had already taken flight. Not metal, not machinery. A new standard. The seatbelt signs hadn't even turned off when Skylux Airlines' internal systems began to hum, not with flight operations, but with crisis containment. Somewhere inside the airline's downtown headquarters, emergency Slack threads blinked red with notifications. The real-time passenger footage had hit external feeds. Hashtags were trending. Screens in corporate legal lit up with mirror recordings from 4 angles inside Flight SL319's first-class cabin. The incident was no longer internal. It was institutional. Back on board. Victoria Grant sat silently in seat 2A, eyes forward, hands folded over her lap. But her silence was not absence, it was pressure. The kind that accumulates before a formal reckoning. Riley leaned in from across the aisle. "They've issued the first official release," she whispered. "It's going live in the next 5 minutes. Legal confirmed. Full acknowledgement of discriminatory mismanagement during reassignment protocol. They're launching a fleet-wide investigation. Victoria didn't blink. What about Emma? Not mentioned yet, Riley replied. But Denise is filing her preliminary witness affidavit. Angela signed it already. Victoria nodded. What about Noah? He's being held for internal review, not suspension for now. Legal flagged his tablet logs for protocol contradiction, but they also noted his on-record admission and apology. Meanwhile, in row 3A. Julian Hayes finished a quick call. My outlet just cleared editorial space. This is going top of page in the aviation business section. We've never had a story this clean. 3 angles, verified timestamps, crew names, and a protagonist who doesn't raise her voice but still brings the ceiling down. Emma flinched when she heard the word protagonist. She stood near the galley, pale and motionless. No passengers looked at her now, not out of fear, but irrelevance. She had become background noise in a drama she once tried to control. Angela, with her 30 years of service tucked behind a calm exterior, broke the quiet. I've worked hundreds of flights, she said softly to Noah. I've seen passengers scream and threaten for less than what Victoria endured. I've seen crew ignore their own discomfort just to protect appearances. But today, you watched someone calmly unravel an entire rot we've tiptoed around for years. Noah whispered. It was always just the way things worked. Angela's voice sharpened. And that's how the worst things survive. The PA system crackled. Denise Foster's voice came through, not the captain's. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Skylux Compliance Officer Denise Foster speaking. Due to the gravity of an active passenger incident, we want to inform all passengers that first-class crew members Emma Stone and Noah Peters will no longer be serving during this flight. Interim personnel from our backup cabin team will assume responsibilities. Gasps echoed through first class. Emma turned slowly, her eyes wide. No, she whispered. Victoria didn't look at her. Denise continued. This decision has been made under Article 7 of our In-Flight Authority Protocol, which allows for operational reassignment when safety, equity, or public integrity are in question. Any concerns may be directed to compliance as Skylux Air. Com. Emma stepped forward. Captain, please. The cockpit door remained closed. Angela moved to her gently. Don't make it worse. Emma's shoulders dropped. She walked back to the rear jump seat in silence, every step erasing years of perceived authority. Noah remained standing, frozen, but Denise approached him and spoke softly. Off mic. You spoke the truth, she said. That's your path forward. But for now, compliance needs full clearance from you. He nodded once, eyes wet, and handed over his tablet. Back in 2B. William Reed turned to Victoria. You've done something here I didn't think was possible. You didn't just expose a crew. You exposed a chain. Victoria looked at him. Chains don't snap in one place. They snap at the link that resists. Julian Hayes turned around, and your resistance was flawless. Riley tapped her phone again. Skylux just confirmed in their press release a formal suspension of all manual reassignment discretion. From now on, every override must be documented and approved in writing before takeoff. Victoria raised an eyebrow. That's their fix. It's the beginning, Riley said. Also, this part's interesting. They're reinstating a previously rejected equity framework. Victoria leaned in. Which one? Riley turned the screen. The file name glowed. Sky Equity Protocol Draft. GVT Alpha. They're enacting your model, Riley said. fleet-wide. A slow hush rippled through Victoria's chest, then outward into the cabin like the weight of centuries exhaled in one controlled breath. Lucas Bennett stood now. His face was tight with frustration, but he made no move to speak. Instead, he looked toward Victoria with something between irritation and reluctant awe. "You cost me $500 million, he said flatly. Victoria met his eyes. "No," she replied. "You cost yourself everything by not recognizing that equity isn't expensive. Ignoring it is." From behind Lucas. Maya Patterson, the woman who had once been downgraded for a celebrity's comfort, stood and added, "You all thought she'd fight for her seat. She fought for the system, and she just won." Victoria didn't reply. She didn't need to, because the consequences had finally arrived, not just for Emma or Noah, but for Skylux, for every silent meeting, every undocumented reassignment, every unspoken protocol. The system hadn't just cracked, it had collapsed, and something new, something clean, was already being written. The hum of the engines faded beneath the roar of consequence. Skylux Flight SL-3119 hadn't left the ground, but power had already changed hands quietly, irreversibly. Victoria Grant sat poised in Seat 2A, the very place she'd been denied, now elevated to something symbolic. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was command, and everyone knew it. Lucas Bennett, once the smug executive hovering above accountability, was now the only man in the cabin still trying to pretend gravity hadn't shifted. But even his posture had changed. His arms were no longer crossed with confidence. They were folded defensively, like armor against a truth he could no longer deny. "Victoria," he said, voice tight. "I know this looks bad. It doesn't look bad." She cut in. "It is bad. And it didn't start today. It started every time someone like me was deemed unworthy of being believed." Lucas leaned toward her, trying to lower his voice, but not his ego. "We can't let this spiral. You and I, we have too much riding on our deal." "Our deal?" Victoria repeated slowly. "The one where I'd deliver equity frameworks to your company. But you couldn't recognize it when it stood in front of you wearing jeans." Lucas glanced at Riley, who was now monitoring media feeds, emails from legal, and ongoing public sentiment. "She's been quoted in 3 outlets already," Riley said without looking up. "CNN just requested an exclusive." Lucas paled. William Reed, seated beside Victoria, leaned back and turned toward Lucas with a calm smile. "You ever notice how quiet power is when it turns?" Lucas didn't respond. Angela returned to the front cabin from the galley, pausing beside Victoria. She looked different now, shoulders no longer hunched from years of compliance, but lifted slightly, like someone who'd just remembered her own spine. "Ms. Grant," she said respectfully, "I just received word from flight operations. The captain has approved a limited service reset. That includes a revised service roster. Would you like anything while we prepare to resume boarding?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You're taking her order first." Angela didn't even blink. She's in 2A. It wasn't just about position anymore. It was respect. Earned, recognized, and now enforced by those who once watched from the sidelines. Julian Hayes stood up with his phone in hand and moved into the aisle. "Victoria, mind if I ask one last question before this flight takes off?" She gave a small nod. "You didn't threaten. You didn't yell. You never raised your voice. But everything in this cabin just changed. What was your strategy?" She turned to him fully. "I didn't come here to be feared," she said. "I came here to be seen. And sometimes, when you hold your ground without making a scene, the world has no choice but to adjust its lens. He lowered the phone slowly. That's going to headline. Meanwhile, back near the cockpit, Emma remained seated in the rear jump seat, isolated from the cabin she once managed. Her earpiece had gone silent, her tablet locked, her voice stripped of procedural power. She stared ahead. Numb? Noah sat just 3 seats away, but he hadn't looked at her since the reassignment was revoked. There was nothing left to say. Across the cabin, Maya Patterson stood beside seat 4A. "For every time we swallowed it to keep things smooth," she said aloud. "Today proves we don't have to anymore." Angela nodded. Flight crews are trained in hospitality, but not humanity. That changes now. Victoria looked toward Denise, who was finalizing a statement to corporate from her seat with clinical speed. "We'll need a fleet-wide retraining initiative," Denise said, almost to herself. "This is going to set new precedent." Lucas stood now. "Victoria, please." His voice strained. "Let's talk. Let's find a way to salvage what we've built." Victoria rose from her seat, finally standing at full height in the center of first class. The aisle was quiet. Every passenger's eyes were on her. "You built a model," she said, "but I built a movement. And what I just witnessed from you on this flight, in this moment, tells me everything I need to know about your leadership." She turned to Riley. "Contact Elaine. Tell her to initiate Clause 8C of the Bennett contract. Termination with cause." Riley nodded. "Effective immediately. Effective now." Lucas staggered slightly, as if the words themselves had weight. "You're ending the deal, I'm ending the delusion," she said. Then she faced the passengers, not as a woman recovering dignity, but as a leader redefining it. This cabin no longer operates on appearances. It operates on truth. And if we want equity at 36,000 feet, we need to practice it before we even leave the gate. From the rear of the cabin, a single clap echoed, then another, and then the applause grew. Not wild, not performative, steady, purposeful. Julian Hayes lifted his camera for the final shot. A black woman standing in first class not as a story of triumph, but as a standard now set. Power had not only reversed, it had redefined itself. By the time Skylux flight SL-319 finally pushed back from the gate, it was no longer just a flight. It was a floating forum, a moving monument to what happens when silence shatters and systems fall. Inside the first-class cabin, something even more remarkable had taken root order, born not of fear, but of clarity. Victoria Grant now sat in 2A, not just with authority, but with alignment. Everyone around her knew this wasn't a passenger who got lucky. This was a leader who got even. Not through vengeance, but through vision. Denise Foster, seated across the aisle, was already drafting a memorandum for the board. Angela, freshly reassigned as interim lead for the forward cabin, moved through her duties with newfound conviction. And Emma, silent, seated in the rear with her badge clipped inward, no longer existed in this ecosystem of emerging integrity. But it was Noah who stepped forward first. He stood awkwardly in the aisle, holding a small folder. Not a device, not a form, just paper, printed out, unsigned. "Ms. Grant?" he said quietly. "This was filed internally last quarter. It's your Sky Equity Protocol. I found it in the archives while legal was scanning my tablet." Victoria looked at him evenly. "You mean the one Skylux rejected without comment?" He nodded. "Yes, but I read it again. Just now." All 8 modules. It's what we should have done. He held it out. Angela stepped beside him. I've already signed it. I want to help implement it. We need to rebuild trust. Victoria accepted the folder, not with a smile, but with the weight it deserved. One document won't fix culture, she said, but it can start the cure. A chime sounded overhead. The captain came on the PA, his voice measured. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Skylux Airlines is committed to safe, dignified, and equitable service. Today's events have brought to light an urgent need for change. I'd like to personally thank Ms. Victoria Grant for her leadership and composure under difficult circumstances. On behalf of the crew and Skylux, we apologize and we promise. This is not the end of the conversation. Victoria didn't move, but she heard it in the silence that followed. Breath held, breath released. Something real, finally spoken. The intercom clicked off, across the cabin. William Reed turned to her. That's the first time I've ever heard a corporate captain say the word equity without being told to. That's because this time, Victoria said, he wasn't reading a script. He was reading the room. Riley leaned in with an update. Elaine just confirmed. Skylux's board will vote to adopt your Sky Equity Protocol in full by the end of the week. And get this, Denise Foster has been offered Interim Chief Equity Operations Officer. Denise raised her eyebrows. Surprised. They didn't even ask me first. That's because they're scrambling, Victoria said. And this time, they're starting to scramble in the right direction. Lucas Bennett was still on board, silent, deflated, scrolling endlessly through his phone as if the right combination of headlines could undo what had already happened. He'd been quiet since Victoria invoked Clause 8C, effectively killing the $500 million deal with Bennett AI. He looked up now. You really think you can fix this industry with a training module and a viral moment? Victoria didn't flinch. No. I think you thought that the absence of accountability was the same thing as structure. It's not. It's rot. And when rot gets light, it either reforms or it disappears. Julian Hayes turned slightly, and guess what? The light's not going away. Maya Patterson leaned forward in her seat. If leadership means restoring what people never had in the first place, then I just watched a masterclass, Angela added. And if leadership means stepping forward when others hide, then this woman should be teaching captains, not waiting for one to recognize her seat. Victoria took it in, not boastfully, but with the quiet weight of responsibility. She knew what came next wouldn't be glamorous. Culture change never is. But she also knew this change doesn't start when people sign off. It starts when they stand up. Just then, a voice crackled softly from the intercom again. It wasn't the captain. It was the co-pilot, a younger woman with a steady tone. First Officer Lana Torres here. Just wanted to add, as a woman of color in this industry, thank you. Ms. Grant. Your voice reached the flight deck. A beat of silence, then a wave of gentle applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Victoria turned to Riley. When we land, begin internal recruitment for Sky Equity Fellows. I want every carrier to have someone who's trained to stand the way we did today. Quietly, sharply. Without asking for permission, Riley's fingers flew across her screen. On it. Also, Victoria said, call Elaine. Tell her to prepare a keynote proposal for the World Aviation Forum. Riley paused. Topic Victoria looked out the window as the aircraft finally began to lift. Rewriting altitude-building airspace with integrity. William chuckled. That sounds like a speech that grounds giants. No, Victoria replied. It teaches them to fly again without stepping on everyone else to do it. She didn't need a title. She didn't need a badge, because sometimes leadership isn't assigned. It's recognized. And now, everyone on that plane and far beyond it recognized who the real captain was. Within 24 hours of landing, Skylux Airlines issued the boldest operational reform statement in its 42-year history. It didn't arrive wrapped in platitudes or PR-safe phrases. It came with signatures, timestamps, and a 10-page PDF titled The Sky Equity Protocol Mandatory Implementation Framework. Phase Y? And at the bottom of page 1, just beneath the Skylux CEO's digital signature, sat another name in bold: Victoria Grant, Strategic Equity Advisor Independent. News broke across multiple platforms. Victoria's confrontation aboard flight SL-319 had become a catalyst not just for headlines, but for structural overhauls. The footage circulated from passenger recordings now topped 8 million views. Hashtags like Reclaim2A and Equity in Airlines were trending in 5 countries. And within Skylux's own internal servers, a flurry of sudden meetings, reassignments, and legacy training suspensions began taking place before any memo could be leaked to the press. But behind the headlines, real work was happening. It began with a mandatory cross-departmental audit of all boarding, reassignment, and dress code-related decisions made over the past 18 months. Denise Foster, now temporarily elevated to Chief Equity Operations Officer, was handed full access to the airline's internal systems and, more notably, the authority to freeze promotions and initiate terminations where bias was confirmed. Her first move: suspend every unverified priority passenger override that wasn't logged with time-stamped justification. Her second: install Victoria Grant as the external equity systems architect, granting her access to every layer of crew training, client classification, and customer resolution policies. And Victoria, methodical as ever, got to work. She entered Skylux headquarters flanked not by PR consultants or bodyguards, but by 2 junior analysts from Grant Vision Tech. Their task: cross-reference Skylux's operational data with real-time racial and gender bias signals derived from AI-powered audits. What they uncovered stunned even the executives who had signed her contract. An internal report, buried in archives under the label Discretion Risk 2022, revealed a pattern: passengers flagged for secondary check-in clearance were 73% more likely to be Black or Latino. Of those, 62% were reassigned, downgraded, or delayed, often with no compensation or official documentation, and in nearly every case, the justification was logged as ambiguous behavior or guest mismatch. Victoria looked across the table at the room of stunned executives. "You didn't need new rules," she said. "You needed new courage." One VP tried to interject. "We were working with legacy systems." "No," she snapped. "You were hiding behind them." Her team's third discovery was perhaps the most damning. A memo, unsigned but widely distributed in Slack, had circulated across crew teams just 6 months prior. The subject line was chilling in hindsight: "Legacy first, optics matter." It was the same phrase whispered on board flight SL-319. The same phrase Emma couldn't explain. The same phrase William Reed remembered overhearing at the gate. Victoria turned to Denise. "We need to rename this policy, publicly disavow it, and mandate a zero-tolerance clause for any variation of its logic. If someone says it again, even jokingly, they're off your payroll." Denise nodded. Done. Next came the training modules. Victoria didn't use recycled language from HR webinars. She built new systems from scratch. Each lesson started not with a graph or checklist, but with a passenger story. Real names, real outcomes, real footage. They called the course Altitude with Integrity, seeing what protocol misses. And in the first test group of 200 cabin crew members, 84% reported they had never thought of routine procedures as a form of bias until now. Meanwhile, within Skylux's HR division, a new process was quietly deployed. The anonymous accountability loop. It allowed passengers to submit feedback that was automatically encrypted and reviewed by a third-party oversight panel. No more disappearing complaints. No more passive dismissal. It was revolutionary and painful, because reform always is. Emma's name was never publicly mentioned again, but insiders confirmed she'd been formally released from duty. Noah, on the other hand, chose to stay, not as a flight attendant, but as part of Skylux's new internal witness task force, which monitored onboard crew behavior and flagged protocol inconsistencies. His application had only one line of explanation. "I want to be part of the repair." Victoria read it herself and approved it. But institutional reform didn't stop at Skylux. Other airlines took notice. 4 carriers requested briefings on Victoria's Sky Equity Protocol within 2 weeks. 2 asked for licensing. 1 asked if she'd consult on rewriting their boarding policies altogether. Her answer: "Not until you prove you want change more than applause." She didn't sell what wasn't earned. Back at Grant Vision Tech, Victoria began building the second phase of her strategy, integrating AI bias, auditing directly into check-in systems, boarding manifests, and crew-facing dashboards. The goal was clear. Bias shouldn't have to be called out. It should be designed out. Riley summarized it best in a morning call. "You didn't just get your seat back. You gave a voice to every seat that's ever been quietly taken." Victoria didn't respond at first. She stared at the monitor, watching the dashboard display real-time data flights operating with integrity, crews trained, feedback flagged and answered. Then she said, "Good. Now let's teach the skies how to stay clean." It didn't take long for the public to catch up. By the end of the week, hashtags like Sky Equity Now, Seat 2A, and Fly Like Victoria were trending globally. What started as a single recorded confrontation in a first-class cabin had evolved into a cultural lightning rod. Talk shows debated it. Editorials quoted it. Universities assigned it. But most notably, everyday travelers, those who had endured the quiet humiliations of boarding lines, random checks, and unexplained reassignments, finally had a name to attach to their stories: Victoria Grant. On Twitter, a single post with the caption, "She didn't fight for a seat. She fought for our future," amassed 4.2 million likes and 1.1 million retweets. In New York, a commuter at JFK snapped a photo of herself standing confidently in line at the Delta Sky Lounge, captioning it, "Victoria Grant taught me to take up space and not apologize for it." In Nairobi, a Kenyan software developer posted a video explaining how her upgrade request had been denied 10 times until she mentioned the Sky Equity Protocol to the agent. "They didn't argue," she said. "They just complied." And in Atlanta, a group of black high school students staged a mock trial for corporate bias in flight seating using transcripts from SL-3119 as source material. One of them played Victoria. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood her ground. Victoria saw it all quietly, from her home office overlooking the skyline. She didn't repost or retweet. She simply watched the ripple become a wave. Riley, on the other hand, kept the receipts. Public support is at 89% positive, she said. Scrolling through sentiment analytics, you've got senators quoting your phrases in hearings. Influencers are calling for similar audits in other industries. And Netflix just reached out for documentary rights. Victoria blinked. We're not done with the work yet. Exactly. Riley said. That's why the attention matters. It's not fame. It's fuel. At Skylux HQ, passenger complaint submissions jumped 270%. But instead of being buried, they were now routed through an encrypted AI system that cross-referenced behavioral language for racial and gender bias, then flagged urgent cases directly to the new Office of Passenger Equity, an entire department that hadn't existed 2 weeks prior. Victoria visited them discreetly, avoiding media, wearing black and blending into elevators like she always used to. But this time, when she walked through the floor, people stood, not out of fear, but out of recognition. An HR coordinator whispered to a colleague, "That's her. That's the one who made us accountable." Back in public, the ripple effects spread far beyond airlines. At a downtown Chicago bank, a young Latina client who'd been ignored in line held up her ID and said clearly, "Before you dismiss me, know that I've read the protocol." "And I'm recording." The banker blinked, and then apologized. In Houston, a gay black man was told to wait in a side room for a job interview because the recruiter needed to prep the executive team first. He quietly placed his phone on the table and said, "Let's not do this the way SL-3199 started." They offered him coffee, then the job. In each moment, people weren't demanding special treatment. They were demanding equal visibility, and they were using Victoria's words to do it. Julian Hayes published his column a week after the flight. The headline read, "Altitude isn't the same as respect, but Victoria Grant just raised both." In it, he wrote, "I've covered protests, policy shifts, and whistleblower cases for over a decade. But never have I seen a single act of calm defiance spark such a focused, articulate, and scalable response to systemic erosion." Ms. Grant didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She stood. And because she stood, millions are starting to. But not all reactions were celebratory. One high-ranking executive at a rival airline issued a thinly veiled comment. "We can't let every seating complaint turn into a political campaign." Victoria's response? She didn't respond. Instead, she doubled the number of Sky Equity Protocol training kits distributed across U.S. carriers. She funded an equity simulation lab in Oakland, and she began publishing free case studies on how to audit bias in invisible systems from healthcare intake forms to apartment leasing agreements. She called the new program Gatekeepers Anonymous. Because real awakening wasn't about fire, it was about focus. At a speaking engagement in Boston, a college student stood during the Q&A and asked Ms. Grant, "Do you think one person can really change an industry?" Victoria looked at her for a long, quiet moment, then replied, "No." The room froze. "I think one person can expose the rot." She continued, "But it takes millions to build the new floor beneath it. I didn't fix anything yet, but I lit the hallway, and now others are walking through." The student sat down, tears in her eyes. Victoria looked around the room, then added, "And if you want to lead, stop asking for applause, start asking for accountability." The room stood, not in ovation, in alignment. Public awakening wasn't about volume, it was about vision, and now the world had it. What began on Skylux flight SL-319 didn't stay in aviation. It spread across industries, across continents, and most notably across boardrooms that had long mastered the art of quiet exclusion behind elegant policies and polished brand messaging. Victoria Grant's confrontation had started as a flashpoint, but weeks later, it was unmistakably something else. A signal. A warning flare shot into the clouds for every company that believed equity was optional. The first domino fell in Europe, where the CEO of Helios Air, once proud of their heritage guest tier system, announced the dissolution of all loyalty programs that used discretionary boarding upgrades. In their place, they installed Victoria's Sky Equity Protocol under a licensing agreement with Grant Vision Tech. We realized, the Helios CEO said publicly, that hierarchy cannot come at the cost of humanity. In Japan, Koseki Rail implemented a revised equity policy for reserved seating after a senior attendant refused to reseat an elderly woman of Korean descent for a priority executive. They cited the Victoria Grant precedent in their announcement. And in Canada, an airline union threatened a work stoppage until their employer agreed to mandate equity training for all cabin crew. When questioned by press, the union leader said simply, "If the skies can change, so can we." Back in the U.S., pressure mounted on Skylux's top competitors. Continental Hawk Airlines issued a cryptic one-paragraph statement attempting to dismiss Victoria's story as a unique event, but the public wasn't buying it. Flight attendants began leaking stories anonymously. Passenger complaints from years past resurfaced. One was especially damning a black professor who had been asked 3 times to prove her seat was hers on a flight where her name was printed on the safety card pocket. Victoria's name was never in the room, but her presence was. Even in industries unrelated to transportation, boardrooms started to audit their own silence. A luxury hotel chain removed guest appearance standards from its VIP protocols. A Fortune 500 insurance provider scrapped its tier-based escalation delay system after discovering that lower-income zip codes were flagged more often for manual underwriting reviews. And in tech, that's where the most unexpected echo landed. Lucas Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett AI, had gone silent since the SL-319 incident. But silence didn't stop investors from acting. A week after Victoria invoked Clause 8C and canceled their $500 million partnership, Bennett AI's valuation dropped 11%, then 19%, then 24%, when a leaked internal email showed that Lucas had labeled Victoria a PR disaster disguised as a strategist. What followed was swift. 4 board members resigned. 2 top engineers left the company. And then came the most stunning blow. A whistleblower within Bennett AI revealed that the company's flagship product, an algorithm designed to screen job candidates, had a hidden filter. It deprioritized applicants from HBCUs. The industry erupted. Victoria was asked for comment. She gave none. Instead, she quietly published a white paper through Grant Vision Tech titled The Equity Mirage. When performance masks prejudice, it was downloaded 2.4 million times in the first week. Meanwhile, within Skylux, reform had accelerated. Flight attendants now received monthly anonymized equity performance reports tracking passenger treatment, seating disputes, and silent downgrade patterns. Infractions weren't just reprimanded, they were retrained. Each flagged incident was turned into a learning module, not for punishment, but for pattern breaking. Angela, now a senior equity liaison, spoke at a staff summit. "I used to think dignity was something we gave," she said, "but I realize now, it's something we protect. It was never ours to grant, but it's always ours to defend." The room stood. No applause, just quiet commitment. Victoria remained behind the scenes. She rarely appeared on television. She declined documentary deals. She turned down keynote offers from hedge funds and tech expos alike. But she kept writing, kept building, kept coding. And her company, once a niche firm focused on fairness in AI hiring, now hosted an entire division dedicated to equity infrastructure, schools, airlines, healthcare systems, entertainment platforms. They called it Altimeter. Its tagline: "We don't raise voices, we raise standards." In an interview with a global leadership magazine, Victoria was asked why she never trademarked her name, never capitalized on the massive brand explosion. She answered with only 3 words. "Because it's bigger," the journalist pressed. Bigger than what? She smiled slightly. Bigger than me. But not everyone agreed. A startup CEO once said on a podcast, "Not everyone can be Victoria Grant." But what happened next shut that notion down. An intern from Nigeria, a trans flight attendant from Brazil, a South Asian mother in tech support, all publicly shared their own moments of standing firm after reading or watching Victoria's story. Each ended with the same phrase, "I didn't yell. I didn't run. I stood." And then the world echoed back. We see you now. That's when the real transformation began. Because when enough people stop moving out of the way, the world has to make room. It was the kind of message that didn't come through email or press wire. It came as a handwritten envelope delivered by courier, not labeled urgent, not flagged by handlers. Just a clean white packet, no return address, slipped into Victoria Grant's personal office mailbox at Grant Vision Tech. Inside it, 1 photograph, 1 flash drive, and a folded page with only 5 typed words. "You were never wrong." Victoria raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Riley, ever alert, caught the shift in her expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. Victoria held up the flash drive. "Let's find out." They plugged it in, expecting another interview request, a leak. Maybe a death threat she'd received more than a few after the protocol went public. But what opened wasn't an attack. It was a video, date-stamped. 2 months before SL319, location Skylux crew leadership briefing, internal training HQ, L.A. The camera angle was slightly skewed, recorded covertly, but the audio was crisp. On screen, Emma stood in front of a training room filled with junior flight crew. Behind her, a whiteboard listed agenda items. One of them was circled twice. Discretion hierarchy. Emma tapped the board. "Legacy clients get discretion priority," she said plainly. "If they arrive late, need an upgrade, or have a specific seating preference, you handle it, quietly, without paperwork. If a glitch flags another passenger's seat, use that opportunity to reassign if needed. Don't escalate. Don't argue. Just move them." A younger attendant raised a hand. "Even if they're confirmed passengers," Emma replied. "Especially if they're confirmed. They won't fight it if you make it sound procedural. Say it's a system error. Tell them their seat was unverified. Most people won't push back." The room was silent. No one objected. Then, even more damning, Emma smiled and added, "Let's be honest, folks. You know who pushes, and who doesn't. Dress codes help. Posture helps. If someone looks out of place, trust your instincts. The brand matters. So do optics." Victoria closed the laptop slowly. The room stayed silent for a long time. Then Riley exhaled. "That's it. That's the final nail." "No," Victoria said softly. "That's the blueprint." They turned the envelope over